Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Temple Institute Parsha class. My name is Gedalia Meyer, and I'm podcasting from Malu Dumim in Israel. Decisions are decisions. We may not wish for them to be so definitive, but that's just the way they are. There are any number of instances in which we may prefer to have a redo, but this option is all too frequently not available. This is a fact of life, and the sooner we realize it, the better, assuming we want to become more mature. This is a good thing, even though it can seem like a burden. Choices are really the single thing we have in life that is truly ours. Everything else, from the time we are given, to the ease and comfort of our lives, to the amount of wealth or possessions we accumulate, even our physical bodies, is to a great degree out of our hands. Anything can happen at any time that can abruptly change any of that. Even our minds are on loan to some extent, as many of us have found out. But those choices, as long as we can make them, are truly ours. It is amazing that we have this power. We rarely take the time to appreciate this great gift. We take our ability to choose for granted to such a degree that we place almost no value on it. It's just there, like the air and the words we use. But it's not simply there. It is a gift worthy of a divine being. We can alter and adjust our relation to reality like a god of ancient times. It is this power that sets us apart from all else and enables us to play a major role in our own destiny. But then there is that nagging problem of having to live with our choices. We cannot simply erase them when they no longer meet our goals or desires. They are written in that script forever, like a text message that, once out, can never be fully removed. This is the price we pay for having that near divine level of control over our destiny. We have to live with the choices. We bend over backwards to produce no end of excuses for whatever regrettable decisions we have made, but it is all to no avail. A choice is a choice, and there is no getting around it. It is interesting that one of the classic excuses for a poor choice is the old, "I really didn't know what I was doing." The common version of this is that the choice was made under some form of duress, whether from external pressure or internal compulsions. While there is probably some truth to all this, there is still no way to escape the hard reality of having made the choice. The only solid method is to deny free will altogether, a questionable notion at best that has the advantage of getting us off of any hook. It may work to some extent, but it requires giving up the very quality that makes us human. There is a long history of this sort of excuse making. It goes all the way back to Cain and Abel in the Bible, or even to their parents, Adam and Eve. The fateful decisions made in both of those stories were immediately denied in some way, enabling those involved to not face the consequences of their own choices. Cain's famous, "I did not know, am I my brother's keeper?" is the classic of this technique. Adam's equally famous, "The woman you gave to be with me gave to me, and I ate," represents what we all do when all else fails. We blame it on somebody else, or else we claim we had no idea what we were doing. It happens that this week's Parsha has a number of these fateful choices in its various stories. None of those involve stoop to the level of Cain in denying responsibility, but they all had to face the consequences for what they did. The truly interesting thing is how the Torah and the early rabbinic interpreters of it viewed those choices and their consequences. Sometimes a lot of leeway is given over a questionable call, while in others, no slack whatsoever is cut. The Parsha is called Vayeshev, which means he dwelt. This is the introductory phase of the next stage of Jacob's life. He had dealt with his brother Esau in last week's Parsha, and with building up a family while battling the connivance of his uncle Laban in the one before that. Now it is time for him to deal with his own homegrown problems, specifically those involving his children. This is the primary subject of the entire Parsha. It begins with Jacob favoring one son, Joseph, and making that favoritism obvious to his brothers. This is followed by Joseph revealing his dreams of his brothers and his father bowing down to him in clear submission, a revelation that furthered their animosity towards him. Right after this, Jacob makes the fateful decision to send Joseph out to look for his brothers while they are shepherding the sheep far away. The wisdom of this command is highly questionable, and the results of it are among the most fateful of human history. They spot him before he spots them. They quickly make a plan to kill him, to bring to a dramatic end any possibility of his dreams becoming fulfilled. But this plan itself veers, as first Reuben, the oldest, and then Judah, the most influential of them, suggest alternatives. Reuben's suggestion was to cast him into a pit in the wilderness, by no means saving him, but at least buying some time. While Joseph was in this pit, Reuben, for some reason, left the group and abandoned Joseph to his fate. This was another fateful choice that would prove consequential. With Reuben off the scene, Judah takes charge and suggests that instead of killing him, they profit from Joseph's helplessness by selling him to a passing caravan. This suggestion catches hold of the brothers, and Joseph's fate and the destiny of the Israelites is on its way. They told Jacob that he was killed by an animal, but he never accepted their story. He knew something was off, and he went into perpetual mourning. This part of the story ends with the simple statement that, quote, Joseph was brought down to Egypt. It was at that moment that the story of the Exodus begins. But Judah is in for a drama of his own. The text states that following his suggestion, quote, he went down from his brothers and began associating with a certain farmer in southwest Canaan. The result of all this was his marrying this man's daughter and fathering 3 sons. He marries one off to a girl from the area named Tamar, who soon becomes a widow. He marries her off to the next son, who refuses to bear a child through her, deeming it to be the offspring of his dead brother. This brother also dies. Judah delays giving her to the 3rd brother, and Tamar is left in limbo. Finally, she takes matters into her own hands and plays the part of a prostitute and seduces Judah himself. After accusing her of some sort of incest for her behavior, he ultimately relents and realizes that the fault was with him. She then bears twins from their fateful union, who would be Judah's sole heirs and the primary ancestors of the future kings of Israel. Joseph himself has to make his own choices in captivity in Egypt. At first, he is wildly successful as a slave to a powerful figure. But this man's wife attempts to seduce him, and he refuses her advances, landing him in jail accused of attempting to rape her. There, he encounters 2 other prisoners whose dreams he interprets successfully, setting the scene for his remarkable rise in Egyptian power in next week's Parsha. There were several choices made in the course of all this. First, Jacob had to decide how to deal with his sons and their conflicts. He seems to have fostered the enmity between them rather than attempting to resolve it. He paid a stiff price for this in mourning the loss of his favorite son for over 2 decades and bearing a reluctant suspicion against the others that entire time. Then there's Reuben, who seems to have genuinely wanted to save Joseph but couldn't follow through with his plan for some unclear reason. The Torah is quite partial to Reuben for his efforts, describing his suggestion of tossing him in that pit as, quote, in order to save him from their hands to bring him back to his father. When he returns to the scene and sees that Joseph is gone, having been sold to the caravan, he tears his clothes in grief and wonders, quote, where will I go? The early rabbinic take on this is highly surprising. They say that had he known that the Torah would write that he had truly intended to save his brother, he would have let nothing stop him. But he did, and grief and second-guessing himself for decades was the price he had to pay. With Judah, things were different. He did save Joseph, but not quite in the way that Reuben wanted. He sold him as a slave. That phrase in the Torah following the sale, quote, Judah went down from his brothers, is interpreted as his status among them plunged. Before this, he was the most respected, despite not being the eldest. After he suggested this half-baked method of dealing with Joseph, which brought only grief and suspicion to their father, his status diminished in their eyes. He could have saved the day, but he didn't. Even though they made no effort whatsoever to save Joseph, he was the one who took the blame, since he could have gone further. What would these 3 people have done if they were offered a second chance at their fateful choices? There is little question that Jacob would have dealt with his sons in a more even-handed manner, and certainly never sent Joseph off to fend with his resentful brothers. But as we know, he had no such option. He had to live with his choices. Reuben is credited with a wholehearted attempt to save Joseph, the only one of them who really tried to reverse things before they got too out of hand. For his effort, the Torah credits him with having truly meant it. But at the same time, things didn't go the way that he wanted. In all likelihood, he would never have left the scene if he had the chance to run things again. But that ship had sailed, and he had to live with the consequences. Judah perhaps really should have been credited with saving Joseph. He did save his life, even if he had to sell him as a slave to do it. But his brothers never saw things that way, and they did see the clear results of what they did in their father's mourning for his lost son. They took out their regret on him, deeming him responsible for what they did, because he was the one who was able to see an alternative path. His own scandalous decline was the result of his choice. 3 decisions, 3 likely regretted choices, but no way to change history. In the end, it was all part of the great plan of the Exodus. But along the way, these people had to make faithful choices to bring things to where they eventually came and bear the consequences of those choices. We wish we could do things over, but we can't. Perhaps it is a bit reassuring knowing that although we make regrettable choices along the way, the place where we end up is in some way the place where we were supposed to be. Shabbat Shalom.